Hey, it's Mel, I hope you're doing well and welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be looking at the spontaneous human combustion of Mary Reeser. I'm going to keep this intro really short and let's just get right on into it. So what is spontaneous human combustion? Spontaneous human combustion is a process that occurs in a living body. It's when a human body catches fire without an external source of ignition. Spontaneous human combustion usually occurs to people with low mobility, poor health problems, people who are overweight, and also the elderly. Spontaneous human combustion usually happens to people while they're asleep. The very first case of spontaneous human combustion happened in the late 1400s, when Italian knight Polonius Fastius consumed 2 bottles of wine one night and it disagreed with him. People say that right after Polonius drank the wine, he started vomiting and immediately burst into flames. There's been many cases of spontaneous human combustion. The last known case of spontaneous human combustion occurred in Galway, Ireland in December 2010. 76-year-old Michael Faherty died in his home, and an Irish coroner actually ruled his death as a case of spontaneous human combustion. Still to this day, people are struggling to answer the question of how this could happen. Now moving on to the case of Mary Reeser. Mary Reeser was born on the 8th of March 1884 in Pennsylvania. Mary had a husband called Richard who was a doctor. Together, Mary and Richard had a son in 1911, also called Richard, who would later go on to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor as well. Mary's husband, Richard, would die on the 30th of May 1947 at the age of 72. After Mary's husband died, her and her son would then move to Florida. Mary was 67 years old and she lived by herself in a small apartment at 1200 Cherry Street in St. Petersburg. The building itself was built in 1947 and it still stands today. In the early morning hours of the 2nd of July 1951, Mary was sitting in her living room chair alone. Some sources claim that she was smoking a cigarette. The first person to actually notice that there was something wrong was Mary's neighbour and close friend. She claims that she woke up during the night at 5 a.m. to hear a sudden thud. She then got out of bed, went to open her front door. She looked out into the hallway to see if anyone was around, but she saw no one. She didn't think anything of it, so she then went back to bed. Around 8 a.m, a young boy knocked on the neighbour's door to deliver a telegram that was addressed to Mary. The boy could not get Mary to answer her front door, so the boy gave the telegram to the neighbour. The neighbour found this odd because Mary would usually be awake around this time. 2 painters that day who were working around the building decided to check on Mary along with a few other neighbours. The group was greeted by a huge amount of smoke and the fire department was called. Now when the fire department did show up, they first of all noticed that the doorknob was very hot. Once firefighters got into Mary's apartment by using a small hand pump, they then went on to get rid of the fire that was still burning under what was meant to be Mary's armchair. Only a small section of the living room was burnt. There was black soot all over the living room. Soot is a powdery or flaky substance that is produced by the incomplete burning of an organic matter. None of Mary's furniture had suffered any type of heat damage apart from her armchair, which had been melted down to the metal springs. Only the structure of the chair remained. The firefighters then noticed a greasy substance which was on the walls, the ceilings and the hardwood floor. One man even slipped on it and he looked down to see what he had slipped on and he noticed something disgusting. The thing that he had slipped on ended up being a severed leg, and this would be all that remained of Mary Reeser. The police searched the apartment and they found it odd that only a small section of Mary's apartment was burned. Like pretty much the rest of her apartment was fine. The fire just seemed to accumulate in the corner where Mary's chair was. Usually a house fire spreads to other bits of furniture and the surrounding walls, like it goes out of hand, but it just seems like this fire in particular began in the living room and stayed there, like it didn't spread anywhere, which is odd. The fire only seemed to occur around Mary's armchair. Mary's charred skull was also found and it had shrunken to the size of a teacup. Not sure how that would occur, but okay. Well, it's not okay, but whatever, you know what I mean. As for the greasy substance that was found, FBI forensic testing proved it to be melted human fat. That is gross. On the morning before the fire, Mary's son Richard had taken his family to the beach. The family returned home around 3:30 in the evening and found Mary in their house crying on a lounge chair. Now Mary suffered from depression and she would often look to her son for comfort. Richard drove his mum home and left her around 8 p.m. When Richard left his mum, she was wearing a nightgown and she was sitting in her favourite chair and she had just lit a cigarette. Mary would be burned alive 8 hours later. The police got involved initially thinking that Mary had been murdered by someone had set her on fire. However, Mary didn't have any enemies. There is a few theories in this case, being that this was an accidental death that was caused by the lit cigarette, and the theory goes that maybe while Mary was resting in her armchair, she fell asleep with the cigarette in her hand, and maybe she dropped it and the fire started. However, there are holes in this theory. I don't buy this theory. It doesn't quite make sense to me because a lit cigarette wouldn't cause this intense amount of damage, enough to consume Mary's body. When Mary's nightgown caught on fire, her body began heating up, causing the wick effect, which is the destruction of a human body by fire, and it occurs when the clothing of the victim soaks up melted human fat and acts like the wick of a candle, hence the name, the wick effect. So what do you think? Is this a case of spontaneous human combustion, or was it a complete accident? Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. I read all of my comments. As usual, thanks for watching. Take care. Bye.